Welcome to Satsunami. Hello everybody. Welcome to the third episode of Satsunami, where I am joined with my very good friend from last week. Hello Adam. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me back.
No problem. Thank you for coming back.
No, although I did scare myself silly doing research for this podcast, so I don't know. We'll see how I feel at the end. But thank you for having me back for now.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for coming back. Yeah, as you said, you were getting spooked by research on this topic. Yeah, today we are going to be talking about horror games and, more importantly, our, I suppose, wonderful experience with them. So yeah, I suppose to kick it off, so usually this is the part where we usually introduce the topic and give a bit of background, but I don't feel as if horror games really need like an introduction, do they?
Oh, I got the Webster's dictionary definition of horror to do all that. Oh well.
Damn. Okay. Well, we'll save it for the next time, I think. Yeah. So yeah, instead of that, I've got hopefully a good question to kick this off. So Adam, what was your very first experience with horror games?
That is a very good question. I'm pretty sure my first ever experience with a horror game, and again, you might debate whether this is horror or not, but to me, it was horror. So in the either the late 90s or the early 2000s, like I can't quite remember the year, but it was one of the House of the Dead arcade cabinets.
Oh yeah,
That was probably my very first experience. And again, I know House of the Dead's not like the scariest game, although I will at the time of my life I thought it was quite. That's my first experience. My first proper experience, though, was probably when I played BioShock for the first time. I think that was like 2008. That was probably that was my first proper introduction to kind of like a kind of horror game.
I mean, BioShock is a good one to kick it off, though. Right enough.
Oh, silly back in the day, and yeah.
Still
kind of does. To be honest, I know it's like what, over 10 years old now, but I was watching some walkthroughs again just to remind myself. I'm like, damn, it's a creepy game.
Oh yeah, even
it actually is.
Yeah, even the later ones, it's like I think they get less scary as they go on, but they've still got those moments that just hit you like a ton of bricks. Like, oh my god, what the hell was that?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I have to admit, like in terms of experiences with horror games, I so basically, I remember when I was growing up, my parents were quite strict in what I played. Like, not overly strict, but when it came to the age ratings, they definitely took it seriously. So it was pretty much, I was in a similar boat of, like, kind of to begin with the world of horror games, I was more like an observer on the outside. Like, as you said, like all the like shooter arcade games like House of the Dead, those kind of games. And even on YouTube as well. Like, I remember growing up and when YouTube was just kind of getting into its prime and everything with like Let's Players and things, and they were playing like Amnesia, Slender Man, those kind of games. And that was like my initial kind of exposure to horror games. And it's one of those things where it's like, see when you're on the outside of that world and you're looking in thinking, oh, he's getting scared over nothing, ha ha ha. And then as soon as somebody says, do you want to hold the controller? And you say, I don't think I want to do that.
Nope. Nah, I completed it, mate. It's all good.
It's like, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. But like the first hands-on experience, I suppose like my first hands-on experiences with horror games is kind of debatable. They were mostly shooter games. So Left 4 Dead was like one of the first kind of technically proper horror / FPS games that I played. Like it's kind of like, I suppose it's like an entry level into horror games where it's like you've still got a gun and you've got ways to defend yourself, but it's still
so like I think it is classed as horror, like.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I'll give you that. 'But, I mean, other games like, In fact, so this is what I was talking to you about, like just before the stream started, about what games kind of constitute as horror games. So, for example, Gears of War, I was kind of having like a mini debate with you saying, can you include that into the horror category? Like for the very first Gears of War? Because I mean, it has its elements of fear and like spooky moments, but I don't know if you would include it as like a full fledged like horror game.
It it's a difficult. I think that's a difficult one to say because I think technically it isn't because you'd say it's like it's a third person shooter. Like it probably comes under that generic kind of action kind of category. But like thinking back to it, like there are some, as you said, some definite like horror kind of moments in it and everything. Like I know you mentioned the when we were chatting, you mentioned the Berserker. Like that
Yeah,
is definitely a kind of horror moment, and the what are the bats called again? Are they called krill or something like that?
yeah,
Like the ones you can't stay in the dark for. That's definitely definitely Gears of War One leaned more into the kind of horror territory than like its sequels certainly did. So I don't know. To me, like horror is like if you find it scary, then I think you can kind of class it as horror.
oh
It's not a
yeah,
very technical definition, but
yeah. Webster's dictionary defines horror as what Adam said.
random. How much money I have to pay for that?
Yeah. Actually, speaking of Gears of War, that kind of leads in like very well to the subject and kind of the first point that I wanted really to raise. So I've definitely like I've spoke about this on the channel before, but getting your opinion or your experiences first. What was can you think of a game like just a normal game that wasn't like marketed as a horror game, was not, like just a normal game, but it had unexpected horror elements?
Oh, yes, I certainly can. And I remember thinking about this question, and it
Yeah.
took me about 5 seconds, and I was like, "Bingo, that's the one."
Hmm.
And it's the level "We Don't Go to Ravenholm" from Half-Life Two, which
Oh.
in my humble opinion, is probably the best horror level in any video game, like horror games or non-horror games.
Hmm.
Like and I think it's one of the most memorable levels as well. Like for me, anyway, in all of gaming, and that's the one that I thought, yep, that's the level that because Half Life Two isn't well none of that. Well, I'd say none of the Half Life games. None of them are particularly horror games. Like again,
Yeah.
there are a couple of elements and stuff. Like obviously there's zombies and there's monsters and things like that, but they're not horror games.
Yeah.
But at one level, it became a horror game, and my god, was it terrifying! And I still find it terrifying. I was like, maybe I should play through it before this, and I was like, no, I'm just going to watch a walkthrough. Like I can't subject myself to that again. Like it's such an effective level, and I think it nails everything that like a good horror experience needs. Like you have
Yeah.
the creepy environment, like the have you played that Half Life Two at that level at all, or
I don't think
or
no, I haven't actually, which I know is like an exclusive to be like, yes, this is my confession. I haven't played Half-Life 2. I played the
well,
beginning.
maybe
Yeah.
that way, so you don't have the eternal disappointment of spending the rest of your life waiting for Half Life Three. So maybe it's better, maybe you're the
Yeah.
smart one in the long run to avoid that
Yeah.
agony. But basically, so Ravenholm is this small town that basically the kind of Combine, who are the bad guys in Half Life Two, they basically like unleashed hell on this town and basically infected it with all these kind of have you seen the head
Oh yeah,
crabs and
yeah,
stuff?
yeah. Uh-huh.
Ones that kind of create the zombies. So they basically infected that town. And it's become a ghost town now, which is basically it's not really a ghost
Yeah.
town because it's infected with like all these like zombies and head crabs and everything. And you kind of get like you kind of have to go through it. Circumstances force you to push through the town, and it's just really creepy and everything. Like from the way it's introduced at the very beginning, like the first time you hear about it, you're in this
Yeah.
like rebel base and there's a tunnel leading to it. And when the character says like, "Oh, that's the old Ravenholm tunnel," it's like we don't go there anymore, and that's it. And then
Yeah.
circumstances force you to go in there, and it's just creepy as all hell. You've got all these different enemy types that just like are so fast and so frightening and shriek at you, and like come from like all angles and everything. And the
Yeah.
pacing is great and everything, and it just visually looks like you'd imagine a horror environment. And it's just so different from the rest of the game because it really makes you feel vulnerable in a
Yeah.
game that, for the most part, you feel pretty like kind of powerful and like you can like deal like a lot of damage and hold your
Yeah.
own. But this one really, for me, kind of really made you feel vulnerable. So for me, it really stands out, and it's the one I'd always go to.
That is a good call. I mean, I have to admit, all my like Half-Life 2 knowledge basically comes from Gaddy's mod. So I really need to play that. Like I will, I think I will probably get that on the stream at some point. But no, that is a good point, especially the idea of, and I think we will like come on to it later, but the idea of feeling powerful and the fact that you've got a weapon in that game. Because I mean, I've seen like all the game mechanics and the weapons that you do get in that game, and they are pretty powerful things.
Yeah,
But like the fact that you've got all of those tools to be able to fight off any creatures, and then all of a sudden getting that kind of that confidence taken away from you because of like that bit in the game. I mean, I mean that is horror done right. I would definitely say that. But I mean, I'm just trying to think of like my examples. So I'm gonna admit, like, I actually looked up my one before before I came on tonight. So basically, I've talked about this before, I know, but sorry, just before I go on, have you ever played the Harry Potter game before?
I played like some of the early
Like the
ones, like
very first,
four or something.
yeah, have you played the very first one?
I think I played a bit, but I don't think I got that far into it. So yeah, I can't really remember. I have to admit.
Yeah. So basically, like I was rewatching it, and like rewatching it now, it's just so silly. You're like, which pixel's Harry and all of that. But yeah, there's this scene where I can't remember why, but you get thrown down a dungeon and you have to escape, and you have to go through three separate doors to do like different kind of tasks to open the door, and you have to pull like each lever in each room. So like the first two are easy. It's like it's all platforming and oh look, it's Harry as a wizard, haha, joy, whimsy. And then you get to the third room, and as I said, looking back on it now, it's not scary at all. But like, see, the very first time I saw this, I was terrified. So you go into this room, and there's just this massive troll that's just sleeping on a bed. And basically, what you have to do is you've basically to like lift up this cage and like throw it across the room, but you're supposed to put it in a certain place where it won't make a noise. But if you like run about too much or you slam the thing down, the cage down, then the troll will wake up and start chasing you, and it makes like this horrible horrible noise. So like I remember like being really young and playing that, and I was terrified. I was like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, speed run! Like it was like my first subconscious speed run moment where I was like, grab the key, run the hell out of there, and fortunately it couldn't follow you out the door. So once I got the key, I ran out and my heart was beating, and I was like, oh thank God, I'm out of this. So I climbed up the stairs or whatever, unlocked the door, thought, that's it, I never have to deal with another troll again. I open the door, and there's two trolls just waiting for you, roaming about. And I remember, like, putting down the controller and just being like, nope, I don't think I will. Just turning it off. Turning off the PlayStation, like, nope, nope, nope. Oh, God, I was like, yeah, no, absolutely, no way.
Did you ever go back to the game? Have you ever finished it? Or?
No, I've never finished it. I think I might have gone back and done bits of it, but that was the bit that I always finished at. Like, if I ever replayed it when I was younger, I got to that bit, but because it kind of scarred me a bit to go back to it, I was kind of like, yeah, I'm not playing this anymore.
I mean, I was just gonna say that's a sign of horror being, if anything, too effective.
Yeah, exactly. Like
make you just like be like, nope, this is it. This is me done with this game.
it's actually really weird because there's a level later on in that game where you have to run away. It's like Crash Bandicoot almost, where it's like you're running towards the camera, and you have to run away from the massive troll. You know the scene in the film where it's like the troll in the dungeon, like the actual troll, the one who's in the toilet. It's like the same one that's meant to be chasing you, and you're supposed to run away from him. And it's weird because I saw like a friend, and again, it's going back to this idea of like I saw a friend play it, and because I'm watching the friend play it, it's it's not as scary because I know they're the ones in control, and if they mess up, it's like the consequences are going on them. But as soon as they turn around and say, do you want a shot, it's just like, nope, nope, nope.
All right, buddy.
Because I mean, like before we kind of go on, I remember, and I only thought this was like a year or two ago, but it must have been a lot longer when you and I had like a night where we played like just solely horror games, and
That was a good. Yeah.
it really was a good night because we went through Amnesia, just a bit of Amnesia, mind you. Emily Wants to Play, that was terrifying.
Oh God.
Five Nights at Freddy's. I can't remember what the other one. Did we get on to another one?
Did we play Slender or something?
Oh, we
I feel we
played.
did.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did play Slender, and it was weird because it was like when I was watching you play, it was almost like I was kind of sitting back thinking, "Ah, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. Adam will be fine. He's great." And then as soon as you're like, "Right, it's your turn. I've died," I was like, "Oh, Mary, Jesus, Joseph, I don't want to do this anymore." Because it was
My
it.
abiding memory of that. Sorry to
No,
cut you
no,
in
go
there.
for it.
My abiding memory is of you playing Emily. Emily Wants to Play is
Oh.
like the first. Like I can't remember what happens, but I think when the first creepy doll appears, my abiding memory is of you going to the nearest cupboard and closing the door. Like I live here now.
Yeah, pro tip, that doesn't work in the game. I thought it would, but it's not Phasmophobia. It will not work.
Somehow they got in the cupboard.
Yeah, surprisingly so. But yeah, that was a terrifying game though. And speaking of terrifying, that actually brings me on to my next point of what actually makes a good horror game. What would you say?
It's a it's a good question, and it's a tricky one as well.
Yeah,
I was trying to think about. I was trying to think this through. I was like, what do I think is like the keys to making a great horror game?
because I
I
know
think.
it. Sorry,
Oh, sorry.
no, I was just
No,
going to
no, sorry.
say I know it's like it's quite a subject. It's almost like humor. It's like a very subjective thing about what people find scary.
You're totally right. I think you've actually hit the nail on the head there. Like it is such a subjective thing. So again, this is personally for me, and again, this might not apply to everybody, but for me, I think the number one thing you have to nail if you want to make an effective horror game is you got to get the atmosphere. That was what I was
Yeah.
thinking when I thought about the horror games that I've really enjoyed and ones that I found really scary. They've
Hmm.
all had a great atmosphere that really puts you on edge, makes
Yeah.
you feel uneasy, and like gets you, gets the adrenaline going and gets you ready to like be spooked and everything. So if that would be the one that I would say nail that, and you're well on your way.
No, I definitely agree. As I said, like I never used to play like a lot of horror games when I was younger, obviously, but kind of going into it now, especially last month when I started playing like week after week of scary games, it kind of built up like a standard. It almost felt like going through like X's almost. It's like it was like I would play one game like Outlast and then I would finish with it and then the next week I would like be playing Little Nightmares and I'd be like, "You're not like Outlast." Outlast had jump scares. What do you have? And it was like each game is like I definitely think like each horror game seems to be trying something different. But I think definitely the tension building is very important. But I think if there's too much build up and no payoff, I do think that's a bit disappointing. But
Yeah,
I think it's probably an argument that can be applied to a lot of them. But it's like if you have too much excess of one thing, like if you have too many jump scares, like Five Nights at Freddy's, for example, the first like couple of times you play it, really like you're on the edge of your seat. You're like, "Oh, what's gonna come? What's gonna come?" And then as soon as you get like jump scared, you do jump and think, "Oh my goodness, that was scary." And then the second time you play it, same reaction. "Oh, it's scary." But by about the third or fourth time, you're just sitting there like, "All right, hey, hey, Freddy, yeah."
it doesn't register, does it? By that point, you're just
Yeah,
like, oh,
exactly.
I'm
Yeah,
frustrating.
because I remember we were playing it, and your reaction was something along the lines of, like, I think you got jump scared, and you just went, "Oh, for goodness sake!" And it was just like, I can blame you because I definitely felt the same way. I was just like, it almost got boring. And I have to admit, although it's not a bad horror game, I felt like that recently when I was playing through Until Dawn, which is a good horror game, but I felt as if some of the jump scares were just like, they would pop up as if, "Ooh, look at me." And I was like, "Yeah, you're a ghost. Woo."
Yeah,
You know, and it's like there was no real payoff for that. it's I feel as if, yeah, to make a good horror game you kind of have to have like that balance. Like you have to have like the tension building, but then you have to have some kind of payoff to that.
Yeah.
But if you have like too much of one or the other, you're just going to get bored. Like I mean,
I,
oh sorry.
No, so I was just going to say, like, I definitely think as well, like, just I agree with everything that you're saying, and I think that the other key thing I'd say is pacing as well, like, which is basically
Oh
what
yeah.
you've been saying. Like, you need to get that pacing of you want the build up, you know, you
Hmm.
want the unease and stuff, but you want like you want those big moments as well where you get that release and stuff.
Yeah.
But so finding that balance is key, and as you say, if you go too far in one direction, then you know it's gonna leave you unsatisfied. So yeah, I just totally agree.
But speaking of a good horror game, this brings us on to our next bit, where you and I were discussing this actually, well, before the stream, about our top three horror games. Which I have to admit, like I had to go rummaging like through the old memory bank, thinking which game spooked me the most. But yeah, before I like go on to like ramble about it, do you want to kick off with your first three?
Again, when you asked me this question, my mind went straight to this one, and I was
Yeah,
like, "Yeah, this is the one. This is the one I have to put on the list because
yeah,
I would probably rate it as the scariest game I've played." And again, it's a subjective thing, so you know, like
hmm,
again, maybe other people might not find it as scary, but for me, this was truly frightening,
yeah,
and that was Observer, from which was released in 2017 by Blooper Team, who did like games like Layers of Fear, and they did that Blair Witch game
hmm,
recently. But this was their, I think their middle game, Observer, and basically it's kind of Blade Runner. It's Blade Runner esque, like it's very much that Blade Runner kind of dystopian, sci-fi kind of
yeah,
cyberpunk future world, set in 2080. Excuse me, sorry, set in 2084. And basically, you play as this character who's a police detective, but he's an observer, which basically means someone who can like hack into people's minds as like a kind of method of interrogation. And that's kind of a kind of key part of the game is him kind of hacking into people's minds to find like key memories and everything. And basically, like he gets this call from his estranged son, which leads him to this kind of a tenement building in the slums of a set in Krakow, Poland. And he gets sent to this kind of tenement building in the slums. And basically, as he arrives, the building goes into lockdown, and he finds there's been this like series of murders throughout the building, and there's the killer still on the loose, and that's
hmm,
kind of where it is. So it's like a kind of mystery exploration game. It's very much kind of akin to what Blooper Team does, which is the game is sort of a kind of walking simulator, but like it has gameplay elements as well. It's not like something like Dear Esther or something. There is gameplay added to it.
God,
But what really scared me about the game and what I think it did like maybe the best I've seen of any horror game was, as I was saying, the atmosphere. That I never felt comfortable. I never felt at ease the whole time I played it. It's not a hugely long game. It's maybe about 5-6 hours, probably clocks in something like that, which I
hmm,
think is the ideal length for a horror game. Because there was no point during that whole time I was playing it that I ever felt comfortable, that I ever
hmm,
felt like I could like relax and stuff. So the tension was always there, so I was permanently on edge. It also has an achievement as well, where it has an achievement for you not to die during the whole game. So I was on extra on edge to make sure I was trying to play it again. So I
yeah,
just had to play it once.
yeah,
Um, I won't give any spoilers for the story, but I'm going to give a minor kind of gameplay spoiler. So if
hmm,
anybody wants to play it, they can mute it for like I don't know, maybe the next minute or something, 30 seconds or whatever. What I think it did really well is there's actually only a couple of points in the game where you're actually in danger of dying,
hmm,
but I never knew when they were. I had no clue when, so that's what kept me on edge for the whole thing, which I thought was a really good example of pacing in that sense. That like, okay, most of the time you were actually fine, but like I had no idea when, so I
hmm,
never felt comfortable. The visuals are great. Like, for me, like one weird thing that I find really scary is like kind of static and kind of jump cut images. I
yeah,
don't know why, but some of that really like puts me on edge, and there's a lot of that because there's a lot of kind of cyberpunk, like your visual, like because you're like a lot of implants and stuff, your vision starts to crackle at points, and
hmm,
there's a lot of static and stuff, and like images will like pop in, especially when you're like inside people's minds, we live in their memories, things will just pop around. So that really like set me on edge as well. The sound is great, like the ambient noise is just
hmm,
perfect for that kind of like you're in this old building and it's creaking, and then there's other kind of like electronic, like like noises and everything that put you on edge.
hmm,
And I said I think it was the perfect length of game. just so that I didn't ever get that way of moving over from terror to kind of like getting used to things or like becoming frustrated. So for me, like it's the one that I think that is probably the most terrifying game I've ever played, and I think it's great. So that was the one for me. I was like, yep, that's my number one.
That's one I'll have to add on to the onto the backlog, because honestly, I think is that not in Game Pass just now?
It is actually on Game Pass. Yeah, I think it is.
I'll need to check that out then, because it does. Like from what you've said, it sounds well. It sounds great, but it sounds terrifying. So now you've put me in like a dilemma.
It might be that because it's funny saying that because again, you might play it and be like, Adam, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, I jumped a couple times, but it's not that scary. So I don't know whether it just hit the perfect amount of things that frighten me,
Yeah.
but like don't frighten you or anybody else. So it could be that, but for me, I absolutely can't. I rate it very highly.
I'm just trying to think for my one, or at least for my first one. So the way I chose mine, I think I chose mine a wee bit different because I was thinking of games like or horror games that I've kind of played in depth. Because I mean, I've played like Resident Evil and like bits of Silent Hill and things like that, but I mean, it was like years ago. And like, I don't think I would do it justice by saying, "Oh, it's the top game," and it's like, "How long have you played it?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I only played 5 minutes and then it crashed my PC." That's beside the point. So yeah, so basically, I've chosen like a couple of games that like I've done on stream or that I've played like really recently. So my first one definitely has to be Outlast. And again, this is a game that I watched other YouTubers play years and years ago. And I kind of like, obviously watching them, it was like, you did kind of jump with them, but at the same time, you knew you were kind of protected. It was like that third layer. It's like, you've got the game, then you've got the player, and then behind that, you've got the person watching over their shoulder. And because it was them like taking the brunt of, screaming and shouting into the camera, it was like, oh, that's fine. But actually having to play it put me on the edge of my seat because I thought the first Outlast game. So just to kind of recap on what the game is about, just in case any of you haven't played it, it's basically you're a reporter who gets a tip that something's going on in this creepy asylum. It's like the standard setup for this horror game. And as you go through the asylum, there's just all these horrors, a lot of gore, a lot of violence. And you basically learn more as you descend into the depths of the asylum. I have to admit, it's not the perfect horror game, but it had a lot of moments. So I played it for 4 hours straight. And depending on what kind of game you're playing, what kind of horror game you're playing, sometimes that can be that can really help, or it can be a definite hindrance. Like, for example, I played Condemned Criminal Origins in one sitting, and I think that definitely detracted from the experience, because by the end of it I was just getting tired, so every jump scare it wasn't really hitting as well. But when it came to Outlast, it was like I was on the edge of my seat, and I don't think it helped that the chat as well were spamming a lot of the sound commands. So every time I ran round the corner, I was jumping from that as well. And I think it's probably my second loudest scream that I've ever had. And on stream. Of course, the loudest being me screaming at Steven and Phasmophobia, but I will get to that. But I think the good thing about Outlast is it nearly has that perfect balance of having the horror aspect where you see all the horrible things going on, but the tension as well. So you basically always have this feeling that you're being watched and you have somebody stalking you throughout the asylum. And I think it's a really good game until the very end. See, right at the very end, I think it kind of loses its spookiness, personally, because it starts to go into a more paranormal territory. For me personally, and I was saying this to you off stream as well, Adam, that for me, realistic horror is a lot more spooky than paranormal. I don't know what it is, but it's just, yeah, in fact, I'll come to that later, pretty much, when we're talking about our own experiences with horror games. But before obviously we get onto that, Adam, do you want to give your second one before I keep rambling?
I certainly will. Outlast is a good choice. Good choice one, by the way. My second one, and actually it wasn't one that came to my mind first of all, but the more I thought about it, the more I was like, yeah, no, that creeps me out, and it still does. and that is Bioshock. Already mentioned it as
Oh
my
yeah.
first proper kind of horror game, but yeah, Bioshock, which was
Mm-hmm.
2007, I think was when it was released. Irrational Games. So yeah, so basic kind of synopsis. It's set in 1960. You play as this character called Jack. Um, Basically, his plane. He's on a plane flying. I think it's from America to the UK or something like that. And basically, his plane crashes in the Atlantic. And basically, he survives the plane crash and he discovers this lighthouse, which turns out sitting just in the middle of the Atlantic, which turns out to be this kind of terminus to this underwater city called Rapture. Basically, a city built by this business magnate called Andrew Ryan. Basically, it's this kind of utopia for society's elite. Basically, in his words, to flourish outside of government control and petty morality. But basically, like, so it was a utopia for a good few years, but then the discovery of this genetic material called Adam. Maybe that's also why I like the game.
Yeah.
And its ability to grant like superhuman powers to people, like basically leads to the city like civil war and the city's like rapid decline. And basically, once you arrive, the city's like falling apart, and basically most people left in the city are these crazed inhabitants called splicers, and basically you kind of need to like fight your way through them to kind of find a way out. What really scared me about it, again, I think it does atmosphere brilliantly. It's really unsettling. There's always this kind of eerie calm around a lot of it, but it never really makes you feel relaxed or safe. You're always on edge about it. The environment, again, I think just the Rapture itself, I think is one of the best probably environments I think I've seen in gaming. And just the way it's like decaying and falling apart, but you can still see its previous grandeur, but the way it's kind of been corrupted. There's a particular bit called Fort Frolic. Again, I don't know. You haven't played the original one, have you?
I think I played a little bit of it. Yeah.
Oh,
Enough to be spooked.
I won't say too much, but there's an environment called Fort Frolic, which I think is about halfway through the game, about that point, which is just like unsettling to the extreme, but also like one of the greatest environments as well. So memorable. The enemies are great because they're all like, they look so messed up and they're like shrieking at you, and that you can just hear how crazed they are. And even like the kind of characters who aren't like sort of splicers, they're all memorable. A lot of them are really creepy as well.
Yeah.
The sound is great. One thing I'll say is that I do think the horror element, and again, I don't know if this one counts as a classic horror, because again, you could say it's more of a kind of like shooter. Again, maybe a more like kind of action-y one, but I think it is horror. But I definitely think the horror diminishes as the game goes on because your character gets more powerful, and you unlock more of these what's called plasmids, which kind of give you these kind of superhuman powers. You get more powerful weapons, so it does diminish after a while, and you kind of get used to the enemies. But like certainly for the first half, I think it's terrifying. And I just have like there's so many episodes, there's just so many like little scenes that I remember from my first playthrough of Bioshock, just absolutely like making me yell, making me scream, like get me absolutely terrified. It has to be like it's definitely one of my favorite horror games.
I'm just trying to remember like the last time I played. It must have been a good while ago because I remember everybody, raving about Bioshock and saying, "Oh, it's an amazing game" and everything, and I was like, "Oh, I might give it a go," and then I saw a lot of the, like a lot of the clips from it, where it's like the splicer shadows and like things running across like the darkened hallways, and immediately in my head was just like, nope, 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 absolutely no way, no, no,
Want
no.
any part of this?
But yeah, I suppose like keeping on the kind of water theme, I suppose my second choice would definitely have to be, and for a different reason to Outlast, it would probably have to be Little Nightmares. I think Little Nightmares, so basically, it's kind of hard to explain. It's almost like a Tim Burton nightmare, where it's all stylized and there's so much of it that's so weird and out there that it kind of draws you in and makes you really interested. Like, there's a lot of moments where you panic a little bit, but I think where Outlast builds like this combination of both terror and atmosphere, obviously it works to its favour, but I feel as if Little Nightmares really draws on trying to build like a good atmosphere. You're walking through, you see like relics of or like belongings that passengers have left behind. You see rooms that have been built up but there's no one in them. And then when you actually see what's on the ship itself, you're basically running for your life. So basically, you play. I don't even know what it is, but basically, it's like a really small like person that runs around, and there's all these giants on the ship that as soon as they spot you, they just go right for you. And because the designs are so like weird, again, it kind of falls into this like idea of being helpless and not being able to fight back. So there's probably a theme about the games I'm liking here. But it's like it's feeling kind of helpless that you can't fight back against these things. You can outwit them, yeah, you can like hide and outwit them and do things like that. But when it comes to actually, being able to pull out a gun or something like that, it's not on the table. Like, it kind of off on a tangent, but I always remember years ago when the Slenderman game was really popular. I remember someone had like created a video where it was like, this is the way you're supposed to defeat the Slender Man. So there's this guy running around and he grabs the page and he turns around and the Slender Man's like behind him and it does the jump scare thing. But instead of it like ending, someone edited like, I think it was like one of the Call of Duty overlays where it was like someone bringing out the sniper rifle and then just shooting them, and then the video just cut out. And obviously, like with that, because they played it up for laughs and things like that, made it instantly like no longer scary. But being in that situation and not having the option to kind of goof around, it did not help, I have to say. So definitely, Little Nightmares was definitely like in the games that I played recently. It's definitely my second favourite. Even though there's like some moments, I have to admit, that I kind of think could have been done better. Yeah, no, I liked it, I have to say.
It's a good one, that one. I think in terms of like enemy sound, that is Little
Mm-hmm.
Nightmares is definitely the one for me that creeps me out the most. Just the way like all the enemies just like either like squeal at you or
Oh yeah.
like yeah, that is a good choice, that one.
So yeah, for your final one, I'm actually quite curious to hear what your final one is because I think you might have told me, but I've forgotten already.
Ooh, surprise.
I,
Hopefully it doesn't turn to being like you're like what that one. But yeah. So for my third one,
mhm,
now again, I don't think this is a perfect horror game, and
mhm,
I'll explain a little bit more about it. But I had to put it on here because I know I said Observer was the scariest game I've ever played, but a good like at least a quarter of this game, probably a little bit more,
mhm.
has been the most terrified I've ever been playing a video game. So it had to go on the list just for that, and it's Alien Isolation from
Ooh,
2014 by Creative Assembly,
mhm,
who I believe were the people who most famous for doing the Total War games. But let me tell you, they made a terrifying a terrifying horror game here.
mhm,
And yeah, so basically, it's set 15 years kind of after the events of the original Alien film,
mhm,
and you play as Amanda Ripley, who's like Ellen Ripley's daughter, like the main character in the Alien films.
mhm.
And basically, Amanda travels to the Sevastopol space station, basically to investigate the disappearance of her mother. I think they find I think it's something like the Nostromo's like flight recorder is like recovered at the Sevastopol station. So she travels there to discover it, and yep, yada yada yada, an alien gets let loose in the station.
Mhm.
So the reason it scared me so much, and it's all really down to basically one reason here, and it's the alien itself, and basically the way it's AI and the way it's developed, and actually like it's such an impressive. I did actually quite a bit of research
Mhm.
just on the alien itself, and its AI is actually fascinating. If you're interested in that kind of game design or stuff, it's really interesting to kind of read and hear
Mhm.
about like how the alien was programmed and why it reacts the way it does.
Mhm.
But like, and the game I think does a really good job of like kind of controlling kind of tension levels. In that, like again, it makes that way of making you feel really uneasy and like really frightened, but it never really feels that cheap. Like, it never kind of feels like unfair. It's also quite terrifying that the alien, as the game progresses, the alien learns like from stuff
Ah.
you've been doing. You never know quite what it's learned. So, for instance, if you hide in a lot of like if the alien spots you and you run away and you manage to hide, you can hide like in lockers or you can
Mhm.
hide like, under tables and things like that and climb into vents and stuff. So if you start doing a lot of that, the alien will learn and it will start to kind of adapt a bit
Mhm.
more. So it might start looking in lockers or something like that, but you're never quite sure like when it's learned that or
Yeah.
like what it's learned. So really, you're never quite sure like as it goes. And I think a big thing as well is that like the alien, like you can't kill the. Apparently, it does have a health bar, but there's like no chance that you could ever like kill it.
Yeah.
So like no way of like killing it. It's always going to be there, but you have the ability to defend yourself. If you have like a flamethrower, you can like fight it off and stuff. So it gives you like it does give you some fighting chance, and it kind of makes you really like rely on your wits and kind of plan ahead as well. Like there was a great sort of phrase that the developers used when they were describing what they wanted the alien like to do and things, and they used this term which I thought was great. It was psychopathic serendipity, and
Ooh.
the idea is that basically the alien's always going to find itself in the right place at the right time. So if you're doing like key mission kind of objectives, it's always going to find itself in the kind of area to make it difficult for you.
Mm,
But it's not going to be that cheap way of it'll instantly know where you are and come
mm,
take you out. But it'll be around that area to mess with you and really make you plan and think what you're going to do.
mm.
It does have it has jump scares the game, but like they're not really scripted. There's like a couple that are scripted in, but for the most part, it's kind of organic stuff as the alien just surprises you or like comes scuttling out. And,
Yeah.
you're doing something. And the fact as well that like it's interesting it has its two levels of kind of AI. That the alien has its own sort of micro AI, but there's a kind of macro AI as well. So basically, like the kind of macro AI notes where the alien and where the player is, and basically, and so what the kind of macro AI will do is it like pushes the alien towards the player, but it never exactly tells the alien where it is. So the alien's
Mm,
kind of micro AI has to like find you using the sensors that were built into it. It's a
mhm.
very clever system. And yeah, I found that the first couple of encounters with the alien, I couldn't function. I could not function. I lost all my ability to play video games, and I was just running around screaming. I got so
Mhm.
terrified at one point that like I walked into a room and there was a little stress toy on a bench or something. I freaked out. I was like, oh, flinging the camera around like crazy. And then I realized it was just a stress toy, and I was like, oh, thank goodness. And then the alien walked around the corner, and
Oh
then I just freaked out all over again.
my
Yeah,
God. Yeah.
it was absolutely terrifying. Like, and like, but I must say, like, I think for as good as that initial part is, the game is too long. It's far too long,
Mm,
and it was one of these things that it lost. I lost my terror over time, and I became frustrated.
yeah.
Just as we were kind of talking about, like, I became annoyed, I became angry. I don't think some of the later parts of the game were like designed that well. I think it becomes a bit too like it loses that kind of cleverness and becomes a bit cheap. But yeah, but like, and there's kind of other enemies in the game as well. There's some humans, some androids, and they kind of can jump scare you, but it's not really like the same. So like again, I don't think it's a perfect horror game,
Mhm.
but just for that first part, like, and how just crippled it made me with fear, I'm gonna put it on the list.
Yeah. I suppose for my final one, like, I mean, first of all, I really do need to get around to playing that game because I actually downloaded it for. I can't remember what it was we ended up playing in the end, but oh yeah, that was it. It was just I think I had asked Twitter at one point whether they wanted me. It was like a co-stream night, and whether they wanted me to play a spooky game or Age of Empires, and it ended up we played Age of Empires because the poll was stuck at 50-50.
Oh,
But if it had gone to Spooky, then it definitely would have been Alien Isolation. So I don't know whether like Twitter saved me that day. You know that moment of I shouldn't be alive. But yeah, oh god, I do need to add that though. But yeah, so for my final one, I'm gonna go for one that's definitely terrified me and has made me scream on stream like multiple times. That being Sonic 06. Nah, I'm only kidding. No, the one I would have to go for, as I said, before I was thinking, what kind of game could I have, like, as my third one? And initially I thought of something like Gears of War because of the horror aspects, but then as we were saying, can we include that? I thought of Resident Evil and Silent Hill, but I've not played enough of them. So I was kind of like, I don't know. So the one that I've gone for, and I feel as if it still has a long way to go, is Phasmophobia. And in terms of story, and I mean, you've seen it as well, haven't you?
yeah, I've seen bits, and I've had the pleasure of playing alongside you.
Yeah, no, definitely. It is a terrifying game. Um, Basically, there's not really much of a story. It's just very situational. It just throws you right in, saying, right, you're a paranormal investigator. There's a ghost in that house or farmhouse or school or asylum, wherever. Go get it. And you're just like, wait, what? What? Can you teach us? And then it's like they teach you. And I remember like I remember doing the tutorial, and I was just like, huh. I did the tutorial, and I was like, I've still got no idea what this game's about. So I was like, it's definitely one of those games that is a lot better. See if you just throw yourself into it, and just start playing it and kind of learning it for yourself. But I kid you not, I have never felt so much like apprehension or terror. Just by the first few minutes of walking into a house, and then just listening to like this ambient, it's not even music, it's like this ambient noise. As soon as you take one step into the house, that's what you're hit with. And it's like that kind of dread as if you are in a horror film. And it's almost as if you forget it's a game. Like you're walking around thinking, "Oh God, I hope nothing like pops out." And obviously, once you start playing it and you start dying a couple of times, then it's all right. Like it becomes like another video game. But those first few moments when you don't want to be hit by this ghost, and I think that's the good thing as well with it is the fact that you can go around and the ghost types are switched up, so you never really know what's going to happen. So you've got a set time to find out what the hell you're dealing with, but at the same time, you've got to make sure that what you're doing is right. Otherwise, you're either going to get killed or, yeah, otherwise, you're going to be able to hopefully find out what the hell's haunting you. And it's just, I think personally, it builds up such a good atmosphere because I remember the first time I played it with my friend Said, who I remember you played it with him, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I did. Maybe like a couple of weeks after or something. I think.
I think it must have been, yeah. And I mean, that was like, it's a really fun game with friends. I think that if you're playing with friends, it alleviates it a little bit. But definitely, it's like that dread and that build up. Although I have to admit, like, I feel as if they could. I know it's a game that's like an early alpha, which I have to admit, like, there's a lot in it I really like, but then there's some bits where you're walking through and you look at something and you go, yeah, they could have buffed that out. Like especially with the death animations, like they're all the same. Like it's just a couple of hands that come behind you and then they go into your eyes and then that's it, you're dead and everything. I mean, there's like a lot of potential there. There definitely is that they could go places with it. So I'm quite excited to see, I have to admit, like where they go with it before I start. So sorry, just before we move on to the last bit. Yeah, like I think the most that I've ever been scared of that game was it wasn't even a ghost. It was this is how terrified I was. So we had to explore this. I think it was a high school, like an American high school, and it was myself and my friend Said and S Banks, who of course you're in the chat, and we basically we went in. And I was in this room alone because the briefing basically said you have to go in this, you have to draw it out by being in the room alone. So I was like, oh, great, that's perfect. So I ended up somehow getting volunteered. So I walked in, I said its name a couple of times, and then I saw like both of them come in the door. But it was kind of poor timing on their part because say to use, so there's a function you can use where if you hold in V, you can use like it projects your voice in the game, and if you haven't got the person muted, then it makes like a huge echo. So I was in the room, I was terrified, I was looking around thinking, what's going on? Is a ghost here? And then Said said the ghost's name, and I turned round and I saw like two things at once. I saw Stephen coming in like into the room, and then I also saw a plant pot beside him, and I think in that like moment, like that haze, like I blurred the two images together and I thought it was the ghost. And honestly, like I just screamed my head off, like just that one, ah! And then, like, as soon as I realised what had happened, I was just like, oh damn. And that was it. I was just like, oh, I was honestly terrified, like, after playing Phasmo. It's a game that I definitely haven't felt as much. I haven't felt as much fear for a game until Phasmophobia, I have to say. So I mean, props to Phasmo. It's going to be great what they actually do with it.
Yeah, it's a sorry, just
No,
I
go for it.
it's actually a terrifying game. I thought about including it, but I knew you were going to talk about it,
Yeah,
so I thought I'll include something different. But like, yeah, no, I think it's a real strength of it that it remains scary even as you play with others. Because
yeah,
generally, I think that's the rule is that things get less scary the more like if you have other people with you. You know,
hmm,
kind of takes you out of it a bit. But yeah, no, I think Phasmo is terrifying. And well, again, there's a you're saying it's responsible for a big scream from you. It's also responsible for a big scream from me on stream when again I got murdered in that high school by
oh
that
yeah.
that crawling one. So yeah, it's a terrifying game. So yeah, I totally agree.
No, oh, it's
Really fun.
I love it, but I hate it. It's a bittersweet relationship with that
When you
game.
want a horror game, you want to have that dual feeling of it though.
Oh, totally, yeah. You want it to leave an impact. I mean, I have to admit, like, kind of going briefly back to what I was saying about when I was playing Until Dawn. Great game, and it does build up a lot of atmosphere. But there was a lot of moments in that where there was a lot of jump scares and things, and it didn't really phase me. Like, usually, like, jump scares get me. Like, I'm terrible for jumping at any jump scare. But when it came to those, it's like, I kind of saw them and I was like, all right, hi, ghost, or hi, whatever, you know. It was just, yeah, whereas with Phasmo, it was like, because there was that lingering fear. I think it was because Until Dawn is like a very different game. It's very fast paced. And it's the fact they're just like throwing things at you constantly that you kind of get desensitized as you go along. Whereas, yeah, with Phasmo, it's like right off the bat, as soon as you take one step in, the ghost is like, "Ooh, I'm gonna get you," and you're like, "Please don't get me, Mr. Ghost." Oh my god. Great game though, 10 out of 10. Would recommend, and you can buy it on Steam. I wish I was being sponsored by them. Um, so yeah, like going on to the final point, and this is definitely going to be a very very subjective point here, but yeah, this is something we were discussing before about how we would make our own horror game. I don't know if you want to start with like,
Yeah, I'll start. I'll
yeah,
start again. I totally agree with you. Like you know, advisory notice. Like it's subjective. You know, as
mhm,
horror is. So again, this might not be to like everybody thinks that would be scary, but
mhm.
certainly for me, like again, I'm just gonna say atmosphere. It's got to have atmosphere. I
Oh
think
yeah,
that's like the bedrock of any successful horror game
hmm,
is just an atmosphere that makes you unsettled, like makes you tense, gets the kind of adrenaline going, and just gets you ready for spook. So that would be the number one thing I say. Nail
hmm,
the atmosphere.
yeah. No, I totally agree with that. I think in any game, and I mean it's the same in any genre, but definitely, especially for horror, there has to be some kind of atmosphere and build up. Like, I always remember years ago, and this is like going back years and years ago, when like all the kind of prominent YouTubers nowadays, like all the Let's Players, were doing the horror game stints. So like they were going through Outlast, they were going through not Outlast, so, well Outlast as well, but they were doing like Amnesia and all of that. And there was one of the YouTubers who was doing, he does like a lot of kind of indie horror games. And there was literally this one game where it forced you to walk from one side of a tunnel to the other, and the only scares in it the creator had put in were like these terribly pixelated like JPEG images that would pop up every so often, and there would just be a loud scream. And I always remember watching this YouTuber, and usually it was very animated, you know, going, "Oh, it's this or that." But see, with this video, I have never seen someone so bored. It's just, it was just sitting there like, all right, oh, it's a ghost. Oh no. You know, and so on and so forth. And you were like, ah, poor guy. Just, poor guy. But I do agree with that. Like atmosphere, if you've not got atmosphere to kind of back up the horror that's to come, then yeah, you've not really got much to stand on. It's almost like the atmosphere's like the scaffolding that you're going to need to go in. I think as well, like if I was making like a horror game as well, there definitely has to be that balance between the terror and the horror aspect. Like, for example, with Outlast, like I think in some respects they go a bit too far with the gore and horror. But I feel as if at the same time, like when you see some of the horror that's used like really sparingly, like you see all the hospital beds and you see all the people strapped up, like that as well, it builds up the atmosphere, but it kind of lets it settle in the idea of, oh god, this is a situation, you're helpless, you could be like one of these people. And I think definitely one of them, or one of the major things I would say, is there has to be a little bit of like relatability in there. So like you kind of, I feel as if like with a lot of horror games, you have to kind of sympathise with the character you're playing as, whether it's
Yeah.
Phasmophobia, whether it's Outlast, Bioshock, it's like at the end of the day, it's the developer who has to make sure that happens. But like if I was making one, which don't get me wrong, I'm definitely not that talented to make a horror game. I'm putting that out there, but it
You could
ha-
probably make a good one, I reckon.
I can make it like in spirit, but not in coding. In coding, I would probably be the same as that guy who made like the tunnel game, where it's just all the screaming, and I'd be like, "But did you jump? Were you scared?" And they'd be like, "No, I'm gonna say no." But yeah, there has to be that kind of relatability as well, because I feel as if you've got a character that you're not relating to, or you can't like kind of project your own fears onto what happens to them, then I feel as if it's kind of a losing battle. Because it's like, as I said, with Outlast, with Little Nightmares, there's that idea that you're playing a helpless character. And yeah, if you're playing a game like that, but they don't like nail down the helpless aspect, then it's like you might as well be playing a game like Left 4 Dead,
Yeah.
where it's like, yeah, you might as well give the kid from Little Nightmares, a gun, and that would solve his issues, which would be a very terrifying yet interesting game.
True. It's true.
True.
Somebody mod it quickly.
That is true. I bet you someone probably has modded it. I wouldn't be surprised if they had, if I'm honest. Oh goodness me. Is there any other points you would say?
One thing I think as well is like, I think a sense of danger, and this is kind of what I talked about with Observer, in that like you don't want the game to be cheap, and that you don't want it to be just like you just get killed and you're like, oh, you don't know
Yeah.
how, why, and it becomes frustrating. But I think a good sense of danger, where perhaps there's only certain points where you are actually in danger of dying, but it's never clear. It's never clear where they are. I think
Yeah.
that was something for me. I think as well, like I think having challenging enemies in the sense of having again enemies that aren't cheap, but enemies that like it's not like kind of like Left 4 Dead zombies where you can just mow them down like a couple of
Yeah.
shots. Having enemies like that do kind of challenge you, something like the alien in Alien Isolation, or some like oh, I've forgotten other examples now, but enemies like that, they kind of some of the ones in Outlast as well, they kind of force you to like do
Yeah.
different kind of things and require you to be a bit more kind of like thoughtful and planning about what you're going to do. And I think as a last point, I would say is I think length is key. I do think a horror game should be relatively short
Oh,
because I think
absolutely.
the longer it goes on, the more time you get to become accustomed to things, and it kind of loses the what made it like so scary and so special to begin with. So I definitely say length is like a final key point.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. I think especially being able to play like horror games on stream recently. So the main examples like with Outlast and Little Nightmares, those were the first two like horror games that I really played in stream, and I finished them both in about 4 hours, give or take. And I thought that was relatively alright. That was an alright stint. But then I played Condemned Criminal Origins, which, granted, I did get stuck at. There was like a level where you had to go in and you had to like solve like this random riddle, which is ironic because I was saying to the chat at the time, oh, this game's great, but I wish they focus more on the forensics aspect of it. So basically, sorry, just kind of a quick recap. It's just basically a game where you're an ex FBI agent trying to clear his name, and you have to go through all these like spooky scenarios to try and find like the real killer and everything. Really well done at the first half of the game, but I feel as if with the second half of the game, I was just getting bored of it. Like I was just getting really sick of certain moments, and then at the end it just goes like right over the top. And I feel as if at that stage, I think I completed it in about 6 hours. But I mean, that's on me for like just sitting there and completing it in a 6 hour stint. With other games, though, I do agree. I think that it definitely, in terms of length and pacing as well, I do think they are very important for because you always want to keep like the audience's attention, if you know what I mean. You want to make sure that they're engaged, but you're not like throwing things at them all the time because
Yeah.
otherwise it's just going to get boring. And yeah, no, I'd agree with that as well. So basically, so yeah, definitely atmosphere, length, and pacing.
Pace, so
Yeah,
yeah, the three ones to nail down,
yeah, definitely.
and you'll be on to a winner.
Definitely, yeah. So if there's any game developers out there, yep. Don't take my advice, but take take
Shit,
ad.
ideas for free. Damn it!
Yeah, that is true. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. A horror gift horse,
We're great
and
at horror games, but terrible at business.
that is very true. But yeah, no, thank you so much, Adam, for joining me again.
Thank you again for having me.
Yeah, no problem.